Hello, I'm Esse. In these slides, we'll be talking about how to gather data for your market analysis. There are two main types of data that you can gather for these kinds of analysis, and we'll start with the secondary sources. Secondary sources of data are typically large data sets. They are typically publicly available, so you can search them online, and they are usually curated and managed by the government or research institutions. Think, for example, organizations like the World Bank. When you're collecting secondary data, it's important to think about what you can gather from the different types of sources that you can get these. It's also important that you remember your SMART goals and what you want to collect the data for while you're collecting it. That way you don't get overwhelmed with the large sets of data available to you. From government reports, for example, you can collect data like research funding information and government priorities. These help you to gauge where the government is leaning and where they plan to spend their resources. It also provides information like healthcare policy plans and how the government is trying to either improve a sector or maybe spend less on it. So, for example, if a certain country wants to boost their research, they may end up spending more money on research in their national budget for that year. This would suggest that you should target research organizations for the reagents that you want to manufacture, as opposed to maybe targeting diagnostic labs, for example. Another thing you can gather from government reports are economic indicators like how much disposable income that people have. This will provide you a sort of context on how much businesses can generate from that particular city or market. Typically, people cannot spend more than they have, especially in some regions of Africa where most of what we do is out of pocket. From international health organizations, you would get information like disease burden. This would help inform things like what kind of kits diagnostic centers, for example, would need. You could also gather information on things like what infrastructure is available, and that may be a way to learn about what gaps you can plug in. Another thing you can learn about is things like trade statistics, what chemicals and pharmaceuticals are imported between countries. This helps you to see what may be locally needed and how you can plug in some supply constraints or supply gaps. Finally, from NGOs, you can learn information about exactly what kind of partnerships may be possible for you as an organization, what the NGO's priorities are, what their disease surveillance needs are, as well as where they're currently putting their resources, because these people might be wonderful partners for your business. If the NGOs are doing a lot of outreach for things like testing for malaria, for example, then they may buy more malaria test kits and give that to diagnostic startups. This would be an opportunity for you to partner with them to maybe supply those kits and generate revenue for yourself. Another thing that you could learn from NGOs are some other information on economic indicators as a sort of way to triangulate the data that you got from the government or other institutions. Now let's go to primary sources. Primary sources are sources you typically gather firsthand, either through interviews, surveys, or just being someone who has been in that space and understands the process. With primary sources, you also need to think about what you gather from the individual as well as what you can understand from an institutional level. So, for example, if you wanted to assess biotech startups, you would be able to learn from a founder what their overall product development goals and future priorities are, as that would inform the kind of reagents or assays that their company would use. From lab sciences, you can start to get a count of their day-to-day R&D workflow and what reagents are they typically use with those workflows. And from operations or procurement leads, you learn a little bit about decision-making process and cost constraints, as well as how they currently source what they need or what they use. This helps to identify what the gaps are in their sourcing and how you may be able to plug those gaps. From startups, you could learn at an institutional level their overall reagent type use. For example, people in the agribusiness will probably use a different set of kits or reagents than people in human healthcare. Research institutions allow you gauge demand for specialized reagents or biochemicals, as these people are trying to stay on the cutting edge. And from diagnostic startups where quality control is extremely important, you learn about what their quality control needs are and how to ensure that your products meet those standards. A few tips on data collection: ensure that you collect from multiple sources to strengthen your conclusions. Ensure that you obtain informed consent when collecting primary data, and be transparent about what you're going to use the data you collect from your participants for. Finally, ensure that you document clearly and accurately, as this will help you gather the right insights from all of the data that you're collecting. I hope you enjoyed data collection.